I always thought working the night shift at a gas station would be boring. In fact, that's why I took the job. I was a sophomore in college, trying to save money while still managing my class schedule. A sleepy gas station in the middle of nowhere seemed like the perfect gig: minimal effort, decent pay, and plenty of time to study during the quiet hours. But sometimes, life has a way of proving you wrong. The station was on the outskirts of a small town in Indiana, tucked away from the main highway. We didn't get much traffic late at night, usually just truckers, a few locals grabbing a snack, or the occasional lost driver. My coworker, Marcy, worked the day shift, so I was usually alone from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. It was uneventful most nights, and I liked it that way. I'd sit behind the counter, read, scroll through my phone, or occasionally chat with a regular. That all changed one Tuesday night in October. It was just after midnight when he walked in, a tall man, probably in his mid-40s, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. There wasn't anything particularly strange about him at first glance, but something about his demeanor set me on edge. He avoided eye contact and kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to walk in behind him. "Evening," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. He didn't respond. Instead, he went straight to the back of the store, where we kept the snacks and drinks. I watched as he grabbed a bottle of water and a pack of gum, but then he lingered, pacing the aisle like he was trying to make a decision. After a few minutes, he walked up to the counter, placing the items down. His hands were trembling slightly. "That all for you?" I asked, scanning the water and gum. "Yeah," he muttered, his voice barely audible. I rang him up and handed him his change. He stuffed it into his pocket without counting it, grabbed his items, and hurried out the door. I thought that was the end of it, but a few minutes later, I noticed something on the security cameras. The man was still outside, pacing near the pumps. He wasn't getting gas or even pretending to check his car. He just kept looking around, like he was waiting for someone or hiding from them. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, but I told myself not to overreact. Maybe he was just having a bad night. Then, another car pulled into the lot. It was a black SUV, sleek and unmarked. It parked at the far end of the lot, and two men stepped out. They were dressed in dark suits, an odd choice for the middle of the night in a rural gas station. The man in the hoodie froze when he saw them. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? Stay quiet and mind my own business? My heart was pounding as I watched the scene unfold on the cameras. The two men approached the guy in the hoodie, and though I couldn't hear what they were saying, their body language told me everything I needed to know. The man in the hoodie was terrified. He started backing away, shaking his head. One of the men reached into his jacket, and that's when the guy in the hoodie bolted. He ran toward the side of the building, disappearing from view. The two men took off after him, their movements calm but deliberate, like they knew exactly where he was headed. For a moment, I was frozen, unsure of what to do. Then, I heard a banging sound near the back door, the one we used for deliveries. "Let me in," a voice hissed urgently. It was the man in the hoodie. Every instinct told me not to open the door, but something in his voice, pure desperation, made me hesitate. I unlocked the door just enough to see his face. "Please," he whispered. "They're going to kill me." Before I could respond, I heard footsteps coming around the corner. Without thinking, I pulled him inside and locked the door. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, keeping my voice low. He didn't answer. Instead, he peered out the small window in the door, his chest heaving. "They can't find me," he said. "If they do, it's over." Before I could press him further, the two men appeared on the cameras again, this time circling the building. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, but the man in the hoodie grabbed my arm. "No cops," he said. "They're in on it." I didn't know what to believe, but the fear in his eyes was real. The two men were methodical, checking every door and window. I killed the lights inside the store, hoping they'd think we were closed. For what felt like an eternity, we waited in silence. Finally, the SUV started up and the men drove away. When it was safe, the man in the hoodie told me his story, or at least part of it. He claimed he'd stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to see, something involving powerful people. He didn't give details, and I didn't press him. "All I need is a ride out of here," he said. I didn't want to get involved, but I also couldn't just throw him out. Reluctantly, I agreed to drive him to the next town over. The ride was tense, neither of us speaking much. When we reached the edge of town, he thanked me and got out, disappearing into the night. I never saw him again, but the encounter left me shaken. For weeks after, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. Who was he? What had he seen? And who were the men chasing him? I'll probably never know, but one thing's for sure, working the night shift at a gas station isn't as boring as I thought it would be. Second story. When I landed a summer job at Maggie's Diner, I didn't expect much more than slinging burgers and chatting with locals. It was your typical small-town eatery, a place where farmers came for coffee at 5 a.m., where high schoolers hung out after football games, and where everyone knew everyone else's business. At least, that's what I thought. The diner sat at the corner of Main Street, its neon sign buzzing faintly as it flickered open into the night. Maggie herself had been running the place for 25 years, a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s with a perpetual cigarette dangling from her lips. She hired me because I was young enough to move fast, but old enough not to flirt with the customers. Her words, not mine. The job was straightforward: take orders, serve food, clean tables, and smile. But by the end of that summer, I learned that beneath the town's quaint charm was a darker, more complex story waiting to unravel. It all started with the regulars, mostly older men who sat at the counter sipping black coffee, talking politics, and swapping fishing stories. One of them, a man named Charlie, stood out. He was in his 70s, always wore a faded flannel shirt, and had a laugh that could fill the whole diner. Charlie came in every day at the same time, ordered the same thing: scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast, and always left a $5 tip, no matter how much the bill was. Charlie's harmless, Maggie told me one day when I asked about him. Lived here his whole life. Lost his wife a few years back. He just likes the company. But there was something about Charlie that didn't sit right with me. He always asked questions, personal ones. Where I was from, what my parents did, whether I had siblings. At first, I thought he was just being friendly, but the questions got more specific. "You ever been to the old mill on Route 9? He asked one morning. "No," I replied, frowning. "Why?" He shrugged, his gaze lingering a little too long. "Just curious. Used to be a good spot for fishing." It wasn't just Charlie, though. Over time, I noticed other things, small, odd details that didn't add up. Maggie would lock the back door of the diner every night, but she'd double-check it twice, sometimes 3 times, as if she didn't trust it. There was also the way she'd glance out the window when cars pulled into the lot after dark, her fingers tapping nervously on the counter. And then there were the late-night visitors. One night, Maggie asked me to stay late to help clean up after a big dinner rush. It was around 11 p.m. when a black truck pulled into the lot. I didn't think much of it at first, people stopped by all the time for late-night snacks. But when 2 men got out of the truck, Maggie's entire demeanor changed. "Go to the back," she whispered, her voice sharp. "What?" "Just go." Confused but obedient, I ducked into the kitchen and peeked through the swinging door. Maggie greeted the men with a smile, but it was forced, her usual confidence replaced by something I hadn't seen before: fear. The men didn't sit down or order food. Instead, they handed Maggie an envelope, exchanged a few words, and left. As soon as they were gone, Maggie locked the front door and leaned against it, her hands trembling. "What was that about?" I asked when she finally let me out of the kitchen. "None of your business," she snapped, but her eye softened a moment later. "Look, kid, sometimes it's better not to ask questions. Just do your job and don't get involved." But I couldn't help it. The next day, I asked Charlie if he knew anything about the men in the black truck. His reaction was immediate and unsettling. "Don't go poking your nose where it doesn't belong," he said, his voice low and serious. "Maggie's been good to this town. Leave it at that." For a while, I tried to brush it off. Maybe Maggie owed someone money. Maybe it was nothing. But the more I thought about it, the more curious I became. One evening, I decided to stay late again, this time without Maggie knowing. I hid in the back office, where the security monitors showed every angle of the diner. Sure enough, around midnight, the black truck pulled in again. This time, I recorded the interaction on my phone. Maggie took another envelope, but she also handed the men a small package wrapped in brown paper. They left without a word. The next morning, I confronted her. "I saw what happened last night," I said. "What's in the packages, Maggie?" Her face turned pale. For a moment, I thought she might fire me on the spot, but instead, she sighed and sat down. "It's not what you think," she said. According to Maggie, the men were part of a local business that had been operating in town for years, selling unlicensed hunting equipment, counterfeit fishing licenses, and other small-time contraband. She claimed she only acted as a middleman, storing the packages in exchange for a cut of the profit. "I've got bills to pay," she said. "And they're not the kind of people you say no to." I didn't know what to believe, but I promised her I wouldn't tell anyone. Part of me wanted to report it, but another part knew the town wouldn't side with a college kid over someone like Maggie. The summer ended, and I went back to school, but the memories of that job stayed with me. To this day, I wonder how much of Maggie's story was true, and how much she didn't tell me. Sometimes, small towns aren't as simple as they seem. Behind the friendly faces and quiet streets, there are secrets, and some are better left undiscovered. Third story. When I first moved to Chicago for grad school, I wasn't picky about housing. Rent in the city was astronomical, and as long as a place had a roof, Wi-Fi, and a roommate who wouldn't eat my food, I was good. So when I found a Craigslist ad for a 2-bedroom apartment in Logan Square, I jumped on it. The guy who posted the ad, Nate, seemed normal enough. He was in his early 30s, worked as a freelance graphic designer, and had lived in the apartment for a few years. When we met to discuss the lease, he was polite but reserved. "I keep to myself," he said, as if reading my mind. "I work from home, so I'm here a lot, but I won't bother you." Perfect, I thought. What more could I want? For the first couple of months, things were uneventful. Nate was quiet, rarely had guests, and kept his space clean. We didn't talk much, but when we did, it was pleasant, just surface-level stuff about the weather, Netflix recommendations, or the Cubs. But as time went on, I started to notice things that didn't quite add up. It started with his hours. Nate claimed he worked during the day, but I'd often hear him moving around the apartment at 2 or 3 in the morning. He kept his door locked at all times, even when he was home, and I never once saw him take out the trash or do laundry. Then there were the deliveries. At least twice a week, packages would show up at our door with no return address. Nate would grab them immediately and take them to his room without a word. Once, out of curiosity, I peeked at one before he got home. It was wrapped in plain brown paper with no label other than his name and our address. When I asked him about it, he shrugged and said, "Work stuff. Clients send me samples." I didn't push it, but something about his tone felt off. The real turning point came on a Wednesday night in early November. I had stayed late at the library and got home around midnight. As I walked up the stairs to our apartment, I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. Cautiously, I pushed it open. The living room light was on, and Nate's bedroom door was wide open, a first. Inside, his room was a mess. Papers were scattered everywhere, and his laptop was sitting on the floor, its screen shattered. There was a strange metallic smell in the air, like burnt wires. "Nate?" I called out, but there was no response. That's when I saw the duffel bag. It was half-zipped and stuffed with cash, stacks of it, more than I'd ever seen in my life. Next to the bag was a passport with a name that wasn't Nate's. My heart was racing. I grabbed my phone and was about to call the police when Nate walked in. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice sharp and cold. I came home, and the door was open," I stammered. I thought something was wrong. He looked at the duffel bag, then back at me. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, but instead, he sighed and slumped into a chair. "Look, man," he said, rubbing his temples. "You weren't supposed to see this." Over the next hour, Nate told me everything. His real name wasn't Nate, it was Alex. He'd been using a fake identity for years because he was running from something. He didn't go into details, but he hinted at being involved in some kind of corporate fraud. The money in the duffel bag was part of a stash he'd been saving in case he needed to leave the country quickly. "The packages," I said, piecing it together. "What's in them?" "Documents," he replied. "Fake IDs, encryption tools, stuff like that." I was speechless. "You've been living here with me, pretending everything's normal, while you're, what? Hiding from the feds?" "Not the feds," he said quietly. "Worse." I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying our conversation, wondering if I should call the police or just pack my things and leave. But before I could decide, the choice was made for me. The next morning, Alex was gone. His room was empty, the duffel bag and passport missing. All that was left was a single note taped to my door: "Sorry for dragging you into this. Stay safe." I reported him to the landlord and gave a vague explanation about why he left, but I never heard from him again. To this day, I don't know if Alex was telling the truth or if he was just some con artist spinning a story. But every now and then, I think about the life he must be living now, constantly looking over his shoulder, never able to settle down. And I think about how close I came to being part of it.